Chapter 23. Demise and Rejection. When Skinner closed the door to his home after him, he made a beeline to his stash. From 2 p.m. to midnight, he fed his habit continuously. The more he thought about Teresa Taylor, the more he smoked. The more he smoked, the more he thought about her. By the time midnight came and went, the only thing on his mind was Teresa and her rejection of his work and, consequently, him. It was the broken meth pipe that set him off. He stood looking down at it for a full minute. Then all he could think about was Teresa's threat, "Get out or I'll call the police." Suddenly he knew what she was going to do, call the police. She was going to turn him in. They were going to arrest him, and his love affair with Crystal would be over. He knew that he couldn't live without the meth fog taking him away. He had to do something now. As Skinner approached Teresa's house in a semi-affluent suburb of Seattle, his first thought was, "I paid for this. Without me, none of this would be hers." The house was not spectacular, but she had told him often that Cape Cod-style houses had a degree of class. His interpretation: she had class. He did not. His front right wheel banged into the curb, rode up it, and slammed back down. He staggered out of the car. It took several minutes of stumbling and tripping over nothing but his own feet to get to her kitchen door at the back of her house. He pounded on it for a full 30 seconds. Through the curtain in the window, he could see the light go on. He continued to pound. In a minute, Teresa was standing behind the kitchen door. "Go away," she ordered. "All I want to do is talk. I want to apologize. I feel really bad about the way I behaved. Teresa, please let me at least do that, and I'll never bother you again." "Okay, apologize. Just let me in. You can do it from out there. Please, I swear I'll be good. I've decided that I'm going to go to a rehab clinic and get straight. Then make an appointment and go. After all that we meant to each other, just let me apologize. It'll only take a minute, and then I'll be gone. Do it from out there. I'm not letting you in. Don't you care about me? Even a little? No. I don't even know who you are anymore. You're not the same person. Please. No. Then at least give me back my manuscript. I threw them in the trash." The pleading quickly changed. "You bitch. You had no right. I'm calling the police." "No, you're not." Skinner took a step back. Her entire body jerked and then froze. In quick succession, he kicked the knob. It bent and fell off. He kicked again. The door didn't move. He pulled his arm back and broke the lower left pane with his elbow. The sound of the breaking window jolted her again. She stepped farther back. Her eyes shot to the phone on the counter. As she ran to the phone, Skinner reached through, unlocked the door, and violently shoved the door open. It banged hard against the wall. Teresa jerked toward the sound as she grabbed the phone. Her finger hovered over the keys as she glanced at him again. She looked at the phone and pressed the 9. He rushed around the breakfast bar. She pressed the 1. In 2 more quick steps, he was standing in front of her. Wide-eyed fear flashed across her face, and she froze against the wall. He reached for her throat. She pulled her hand back and swung the phone as hard as she could. His head jerked. She quickly pulled the phone up to press the final one. The keypad had fractured. The blow staggered Skinner. He hit his lower back against the center island in the kitchen. As he tried to gather his balance, his hand swept across the counter. A pan, paper towel holder, and a block of kitchen knives crashed onto the floor. He fell in front of her and felt a sharp pain. He grabbed his side and looked. A paring knife had been driven 2 inches into his side just under his ribs. Teresa's sight froze on the knife. She dropped the phone. Between her and her escape through the kitchen door were Skinner's stretched out legs. He appeared to be unconscious. If she moved quickly, she could get past him. She inched closer, watching him closely. She stretched one leg over and set it carefully on the other side of his leg. She pulled her other leg up and swung it across. His hand grabbed her ankle. He pulled hard. She fell backwards, hit her head on a cabinet, and slid to the floor. Next to her was a large carving knife. She gripped the handle tightly, sat up, and scooted back against the cabinet. He let go of her leg and reached to pull the knife from his side. She saw his hand move and swung her knife. It slid across his sleeve, making a shallow cut on his forearm. She swung again. He grabbed her arm, twisted it, and pushed it back at her. Her eyes widened, then set into a confused expression. He let go of her arm. His eyes fixed on her chest and the handle of the 10-inch carving knife. Only 3 inches of the blade were showing. He looked into her eyes. Frantically, he pushed himself away from her but couldn't break away from her eyes. With the pain and fear etched deeply, she reached her bloodied hand out to him and faintly said, "Please, don't let me die." Her hand dropped. Her eyes went blank. Her mouth slackened. Skinner sat back against the cabinets and stared at her. He couldn't move and he couldn't think. For 3 minutes he sat completely still. He followed her vacant eyes as she slowly leaned and slid down onto her side. The handle of the knife pressed against the floor. A stream of blood gushed from her chest. His eyes fixed on the flowing blood, and then the darkness of his heart erupted. "Look at what you've done now, you fucking bitch. I told you. You can't say I didn't warn you. See that?" He pointed to the knife. "That's what you get." He cocked his head to the side, looked at her oddly, and smiled. "Get the point?" He laughed fiendishly. Nobody messes with L.A. Skinner, especially not some pissant agent who never wrote a damn thing in her life. He put his foot on her shoulder blade, grinned, and pushed. The knife drove in all the way up to the handle. "You deserve every inch." He scrambled to his feet. The pain in his side, disguised by the meth, seemed minor compared to what had happened. He thought about pulling the knife from his side but remembered that it could be the only thing keeping the blood from streaming out. His eyes darted around the room. Fingerprints, his blood, the broken door, his car out front. Had she completed the 911 call? He tore the phone cord from the wall. Robbery. That's it. A robbery. He snatched a towel from the rack and wrapped it around the knife in his side. The pain surged. He winced. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. He grabbed it and dumped the contents out. He took the cash and the credit cards from the wallet, stuffed them in his pockets. He took off her rings and that damn watch with the diamonds she was always bragging about. He went to her bedroom, pulled the jewelry case from the chest of drawers, and dumped it out on the bed. He took the diamond tennis bracelet he had given her and the pearl necklace he had given her for her birthday. He hurried back to the kitchen. When he arrived at the back door, he stopped. Something wasn't right. The jewelry case and the wallet. His fingerprints were on them. He went back to the bedroom, snatched up the case, went back to the kitchen, and grabbed the wallet. He went to the sink, plugged the drain, and dropped them in. He opened the cabinet under the sink, took out the dishwashing soap and the Windex. He sprayed the wallet and case and dumped the soap over them. He poured the remainder of the soap on her and the floor. He turned on the water, washed the soap container and the Windex bottle. He left the water on hard. With his hands still soapy, he hurried to the door and looked back at her. A hot chill ran up his spine. He shivered with delight. He had done it and he was proud. "Fuck you," he said with a sneer. With his soapy hands, he closed the door behind him. He supported the knife as he rummaged for the keys through the jewelry and money in his pocket. The keys weren't there. He had to let go of the knife to search the other pocket. They weren't there. Were they in the kitchen? He didn't remember dropping them. He didn't remember putting them in his pocket. In the car? Time was working against him at a frightening pace. He moved as quickly as he could to his car. He reached for the door and saw his soapy, bloody hand. He used the other hand to open the door. He had no idea where he should go or what he should do. He slid into the car. He looked down at the knife. The blood was slowly flowing from the wound. Most was being soaked up by the towel. He reached to the side of the steering column. The keys were in the ignition. His hand felt wet. He wiped the blood off his hand with a dry part of the bloody towel. He gazed down at the shallow cut on his arm. His sleeve had soaked up the blood. His first instinct was to head home, but he had to do something about the knife, the blood, and the jewelry. And he had no idea how bad his wound was. Could he call someone? Could he go to the hospital? Could he think of an excuse? Would they buy it? Would they report it? A fall. Yes, a fall. That's how he was stabbed anyway. But what about the cut on his arm? A sharp edge of something. That might work. He would simply dump the jewelry. The jewelry was dumped in a ditch along half a mile of road. The details of the lie were constructed on his way to the hospital. He had slipped in the kitchen while holding the knife. Shortly before the fall, his arm had scraped on a bolt under the sink when he was searching for a can of bug spray. It wasn't an elaborate lie. It actually felt real. That's the story he told to the nurses and doctors. That's the story they accepted. At the hospital, any blood from Teresa would be washed off along with his blood. The shirt he could ditch somewhere. Even if they found his fingerprints at her house, it would do them no good. He had been her lover and his prints were everywhere. The towel would be thrown out with the rest of the hospital trash. He could survive this. He was certain, but he was still scared. That excited him. The meth made it easier to accept the entire event. The horror and unexpected pleasure of what he had done was helping him overcome the fear of getting caught. If he could keep it together for a few days, he would be fine. Of this, he was also certain. The meth allowed him to believe it. As he drove home from the hospital, there was one thing on his mind. He wanted to celebrate his newfound power and his incredibly quick thinking. He wanted some crystal. He wanted it badly, and he wanted an abundance of it. He turned into his driveway, got out, and as he walked to his front door, he smiled while reliving the details of her death. When he got to the part where she reached out her hand and begged, "Please, don't let me die," he chuckled, and a buzzing in his head started. He attributed it to his need for meth. He pushed the containers of partially eaten Chinese takeout from the couch and dropped onto the stained cushion. In a minute, the pipe had been prepared. After a strong hit, the buzzing disappeared. He continued reliving her exquisite death as he smoked the weekend away. Teresa's body lay on the floor of the kitchen over the weekend. It wasn't until Monday afternoon that her secretary, Beth, drove over to Teresa's home. There had been no answer to cell phone calls, texts, or her home phone. The front door was still locked, and her car was still in the driveway. She called Teresa's phone and heard the phone ringing in the house. Beth became both suspicious and worried. She peered into the front windows, then the side windows. The fear began to build when she saw water flowing over the threshold of the kitchen door. When she saw the broken pane in the kitchen door, she startled to a stop. 10 seconds later, she built up the courage to look into the kitchen. The floor gleamed from the water. To the right were a 1950s chrome and formica table with 4 chairs. A 10-foot-long breakfast bar divided the kitchen dining area from the cooking area. She slowly opened the door, and on tiptoe took a tentative step into the watery dining area. She took another step and glanced around the room. At the end of the breakfast bar wrapped around the bottom was a hand. The next step she didn't want to take, but before she dialed 911, she needed to see what had happened. When she peeked around the corner, she was too horrified to scream. She turned, rushed out the kitchen door, and called 911 as she nervously paced. "Yes," she sharply said. "She is definitely dead." She tried to describe what she had seen. However, after the words "definitely dead" passed her lips, the tears started, and she cried softly through the rest of the call. She paced for several minutes in front of the house and then sat on the front steps. Until the police car pulled up to the curb, she put her head in her hands and cried at the horror and loss. As the police approached her, she held back the tears the best that she could. She barely managed to point to the back of the house and say, "She's in the kitchen." There was little that she could tell them. She had no words to describe the monstrous scene that she would be forced to carry for the rest of her life. Wherever she went, whatever she did, for the rest of her life, the image of Teresa in her blood-drenched clothes and leaning on the knife would be etched in her mind. Chapter 24. A Choir of Voices. It took 3 years of diligent work for Detective Martin to feel that Captain Johnson's confidence in her had finally been won. It had not been overwhelming to begin with and had become worse after the spooky case went unsolved. The murders that followed the spooky case were the garden variety type, domestic, drug, and gang-related. Detective Martin proved to be adept at solving them, and in time she sensed that she was in the good graces of the captain. Just as important, since none of the subsequent murders matched Spooky's MO, she never had to face the conflict of protecting Spooky or doing her sworn duty. Tapilot's isolation of her conscience was a gift beyond measure. Without the daily burden of remorse weighing heavily on her and without the presence of Detective Parker, she found it easier to be pleasant, even complimentary, occasionally. She felt as if she finally belonged. She knew that she had become the captain's most trusted detective, and on a cold winter night after a few drinks at the captain's birthday celebration, he had confided in her that he felt that no one could have solved the spooky case. It was better suited for the stuff of legend and campfire stories. She thanked him and thought that what he didn't know wouldn't hurt her and, thus, not spooky. Detective Martin was handed the Teresa Taylor murder case a few hours after her body had been found. One trip to Taylor, Winslow, and Whatley Literary Agency followed by Beth's 5-minute description of an outburst by a client produced Martin's first suspect. When Beth told Lindy that it was L.A. Skinner, she put him at the top of the list immediately and permanently. Interrogating him was going to be fun. She wrote his name down in large capital letters. She smiled, but only on the inside. On the outside, she showed sympathy and made certain that she said, "I'm sorry for your loss." As she happily wrote the details of the confrontation, a low, harmonious buzz started. It had been absent since Spooky's murders had been moved to the cold case category. Now it was beckoning her again. She tried to continue questioning the staff, but the buzzing became enchanting humming and grew louder until she could hear nothing else. When it changed into a faint, meaningless song, she stopped, closed her notepad, and placed it in her pocket. The witness's puzzled expression had no impact on Martin. She would listen to no more descriptions of Skinner's meltdown. A choir of voices were filling her head. Their indistinguishable babble seized her mind. However, she knew what they were demanding. As she walked out of the office, puzzled faces followed her rapid and unceremonious departure. The sun was beginning to set as she unconsciously slid into the car and switched on the flashing lights. By the time she was an hour down the road, the song had become so loud that her head began to ache. Shortly after, she felt something small crawling on her right forearm. She looked. It was a tiny orange spider. She could feel the spider dragging its silk across the hairs on her arm. She felt each hair over which the silk was pulled. She reached her left hand toward her forearm. Her arm was pulled away. The spider continued to crawl and spread its silk. On her other arm, she felt the same crawling. Still, she was compelled to keep driving. Soon she felt another spider on her right arm and then another on her left. In another minute, the skin on her forearms felt alive with the 8-legged orange creatures dragging line after line of their silk. She felt each step of their tiny legs as they moved up and down and back and forth. She looked at her arms again. The spider's silk was making a pattern, as if they were writing the same message over and over on her skin. She began to twitch and shiver as she watched the spiders being absorbed into her skin. She brushed at the webs, but she couldn't get them off her arms. It was as if the skin on her arms had become transparent, and they were under it and couldn't be touched. Although she desperately wanted to stop and scrub them away or even cut them out, she held the accelerator down and sped on. All the while, she could feel them wriggling under her skin. She didn't think about directions or freeway or highway or road names. It seemed as if she were in a long tunnel that twisted and turned. She saw nothing but the tunnel and heard nothing but the harmonious humming leading her on, and she felt nothing but those damn spiders' tiny legs clawing silken patterns. When the tunnel finally stopped, she was at the foot of Mount St. Helens. Then, as she had done before, she made the trek to the cavern. As she came closer, her skin itched more. She could smell the sulfur dioxide now. It got stronger and stronger. She was close. She moved between the two pine trees. A faint light glowed from between two bushes. She walked up the slope to the bushes. She pulled back the branches and stepped through the crevice and made the familiar journey into the cavern. As she walked into the cavern, the petroglyphs started to move up the wall, circle at the apex, and layer over each other until the cavern became dark. She moved to the edge of the molten pool. Hollow, melodious notes echoed throughout the cavern. The black wings rose from the pool. Mesmerized, she stepped over the edge of the pool. The wings engulfed her. Instantly, she became weightless, suspended in a space of infinite white. At first, her arms began to tingle. Then the tingling turned to tiny sharp pinpricks. She looked at her left arm. The tiny orange spiders were crawling along their silk, biting her. Bloody letters began to appear. A G, an S, a D, an I, a P. She watched in amazement as each letter appeared sooner than the last. She saw the first word. It started at her wrist. Ignocerus. Then the second word appeared. And then the third. Protégé. And then the rest appeared rapidly on her right arm. Ipsi voluntas de est. She was thrust out of the white room. She stumbled and fell to her knees. It was that same old command. Ignocerus. You are forgiven. Protégé. Protect him. Ipsi voluntas de est. He is the will of God. With it came the same misgivings, the same horrible thoughts that she had been battling into submission for 6 years. With it came the same feeling of betrayal to her morals that she had justified because she was doing the will of God. Suddenly she knew. Spooky was back. The murderer and mutilator of women had returned to spread Old Testament fire and brimstone punishment on the wicked. And she was his guardian again. She stared at the message on her arms. She hated it. She hated herself. She hated the evil world in which she lived. For her defiance of God's servant Top-Elo, the oppressive guilt enveloped her instantly. She shook the quiet, instinctive inner voice of morality away. No, I will not listen. Forgive me, Lord. She was instantly soothed. She knew that no matter how hideous the act, not to obey meant an end to the heavenly dispensation and the return of soul-crushing guilt and ceaseless remorse. She never wanted to endure that again. She never wanted it tearing through her mind. Obedience to God's servant, Top-Elo, gave her a feeling of purity and clarity even if the acts were morally repugnant to that small part of her that remained. She felt the comfort and surety in the Old Testament's strict and decisive retribution. A shock streaked up her spine, straightened her back, and raised her to her feet. A yellow fog rose from the pool of lava and filled the cavern. The smell of sulfur dioxide filled her. She was turned toward the exit of the cavern. The fog opened a small hole revealing that same horrible, scarred face, and those same deep, hollow eyes. She was drawn to them. The closer she got, the more she could see through the yellow fog. He was naked. The skin on his body had shrunken to the bone. His testicles and penis were nearly gone. The skin on his face was pulled tight. His eyes were black holes. His mouth was a gray gum-showing toothy grimace. The facial scars from the cuts were raised lumps. He looked as if he had been devoured from the inside. Lying at his feet was the rotted corpse of the undiscovered second woman that Spooky had gutted so many years ago. She stopped. Spooky's arms were spread wide over his head. His legs were spread wide. His hands and his feet had been fused to the cavern wall with molten lava that had hardened. He was dead and more horrifyingly frightening than when he was alive. As she fixed on those barren dark eye sockets, she expected the worst. They would blink and he would break loose from the wall. Then another reign of terror would begin. He did not blink. He did not move. Not a finger twitched. Her next thought did not come from her. The cavern echoed it to her silently but clearly. Martin was to bring Teresa Taylor's killer to the cavern. She was to bring Skinner to Topilo now. Her first brief thought that Topilo was going to kill Skinner felt wrong the second it came into her mind. He was not going to kill him. He was going to use him. Skinner, not Spooky, was the man that she was to protect. Although implausible and bizarre, Martin figured that Skinner's murder of Teresa Taylor must be the will of God. There was no other rationale that she could accept. Once again, Martin was compelled to protect someone who had murdered. She knew that what she was going to do was, according to conventional norms, wrong, but she was driven to obey. She knew that he would embark on a reign of terror. More women would be savagely brutalized, and she would be protecting the man who did it. While this was the height of immorality, there was no moral decision to be made. God had willed it, and in the Old Testament biblical sense, it was acceptable. It was her job to protect Skinner, and while she still heard her inner voice of right and wrong, it was transient and soft. She would do as commanded. Martin pounded on Skinner's front door for 30 seconds. It was close to midnight. There was no response. She tried the door. Locked. She went through the side gate and around to the back patio. She pulled on the sliding door. It moved slightly. She pulled up on the handle and gave it a hard yank. Nothing. She walked back to her car and got the tire iron. She went back to the sliding glass door. At the bottom, she stuck the tire iron between the outer guide and the door frame and stood on the end of the tire iron. It moved a little. Then she jumped on it. The door popped off its track. She slid it open enough to get into the house. The house was what she expected. Nice, expensive furnishings and trash everywhere. Drug paraphernalia sat on end tables, coffee tables, and the floor. The inevitable pizza boxes, empty or with partially eaten pizza, were strewn around the living room. Lindy searched the rest of the house for Skinner. She didn't find him. She went back to the living room. Damn. Where the hell are you? She headed to the back door. As she passed the couch, she heard a moan. She walked over and looked. Behind it, between the couch and the window, whimpered Skinner with a pipe in his hand and a distant, vacant look in his eyes. As Martin looked at him, the only thing that she could raise was contempt. She truly detested the man, and she truly wanted to protect him, and she really had to take him to the cavern. So she moved behind the couch and coaxed him to his feet. He seemed to recognize her, but not what was happening. She guided and propped him up as he staggered out the front door. She leaned him against the side of the car, unlocked and opened the back passenger side door, and unceremoniously shoved him into the back seat, bumping his head in the process. His head jerked to the side, and he fell onto the seat. She pushed his legs in and quickly shut the door before they could fall out. After she got into the car, she repositioned the mirror so that she could see him. As she watched his head weaving and dropping, all she could think was that he was a disgusting human being who didn't deserve to live. At the thought, a harmonious hum returned, and into her mind came Topilo's command to bring Skinner to him. Her disgust vanished as a trance wormed its way into her mind. She started the car but left her lights off. The ghostly tunnel to Mount St. Helens appeared in front of her. She drove into the dark and let it take her. She saw nothing but the translucent walls of the tunnel until it abruptly ended and she skidded to a stop. Suddenly surrounding her was an intensely dark forest infused with the deepest black columns. She heard the humming again, now nearly a roar. As if the sound had awakened him, she saw Skinner's head rising up in the rearview mirror. A blank expression covered his face. His eyes were transparent. Behind them were two deep black holes. She shuddered and then fell into a trance again. Without being touched, the door swung open. Skinner stepped out, stood erect, and waited. Lindy emotionlessly looked into his vacuous eyes, turned to the forest, and began the long walk to the cavern. Skinner mindlessly followed a few paces behind. 100 feet from the mouth of the cavern, a bright beam of light grew toward them. Lindy and Skinner stopped. Lindy stepped to the side, and Skinner walked past her. Skinner entered the beam of light and followed it down the tunnel and into the cavern. The tunnel of the cavern closed behind him. His head jerked when the giant raven-like black wings appeared on the cavern wall. The petroglyphs surrounded him and began to move, placing layers on top of each other. The cavern darkened as he moved to the edge of the molten pool. The wings reached up. As he stepped into the pool, the wings engulfed him. He found himself weightless and suspended. A voice came low, harsh, and soft. Propteria tradidit illos deus in passiones ignominiae nam femini eram immutavant naturalem, usum in eum usum ca est contra naturam. Similiter autem et masculi relicto naturali usu femini exarcerant in desiderius sui, in invisum masculi in masculos turpitudinem operans et mers demquam, opertuit erroris sui in semet ipsis recipients. Again and louder it was repeated. And then again, it echoed as the cavern walls shook. As the third recitation came to mers demquam opertuit erroris sui in semet ipsis recipients, the words thundered through Skinner's mind and drove his hands to cover his ears. The instant the voice went silent, he was thrust out of the white space onto his knees on the cavern floor. The light from the lava, again, filled the cavern. The petroglyphs stopped moving. As Skinner rose and turned to the mouth of the cavern, he saw the withered, leathery body splayed against the wall with a decimated corpse at its feet. He walked over and stopped in front of him. To the depth of his core, he felt who it was spooky. He was drawn into the deep, black hollow of his eyes. They burned into Skinner's eyes. He reached out his hand to touch the shriveled corpse. 2 inches from it, Skinner was jolted. A heavy shock rode his spine to the base of his skull. He grabbed the back of his neck. The pain subsided. He immediately knew his mission. He also knew every gory detail of what he was to do and how he was to do it. As horrific as the act would be, he knew he would do it without question or reservation. There was more than sufficient darkness within him to carry out Tapilot's bidding. Martin was standing where he had left her. They neither said anything nor even acknowledged each other's presence as they walked to the car and made the silent, dark, mindless trip back to his home. He sat rigid in the passenger seat looking straight ahead. She sat equally rigid, only looking at the road ahead until she pulled up to the curb in front of his house. She didn't look at him. She still detested him and wished him dead. She could feel the loathing for him deep inside her. She knew it intensely, but she couldn't act on it. Skinner opened the door, slid out, stood on the sidewalk, closed the car door, and trudged up the walkway to his house. The front door was as they had left it, unlocked. As soon as he stepped into the entryway, the disarray, dirt, and garbage repulsed him. For the first time in a decade, he had a compulsive desire to clean his house and for the first time ever to put his life in order. The second he closed the door, he heard her drive away. Skinner immediately went to the stash of meth that he had hung behind the refrigerator. He pulled the bag off the back, walked to the kitchen sink, emptied several $1,000s worth of chemical euphoria into the garbage disposal, turned on the water, ground the crystals into a sludge, and sent it into the sewers. As he listened to the disposal grinding it, suddenly the thought of the meth repulsed him. He was instantly freed of its command over him. He no longer needed it. He no longer wanted it. He would no longer suffer its ravages on his mind and body. He needed to be clean and focused for the mission. Skinner spent the next 2 days cleaning his house thoroughly. He didn't answer the door or the phone. He did not eat or sleep until the house was spotless. After he threw the last meth pipe in the trash, he sat down at his laptop, turned it on, opened the Scrivener writing program, started a new project, and named it the title of his next novel, The Mission. He stared at the title for a minute, and then typed the first 4 sentences. In one day, his life had changed completely. He had a purpose. He was no longer lost. He had a mission. All thoughts of having killed Teresa had disappeared, replaced by an overwhelming desire to complete the mission. He saved the file, turned off the computer, went to the kitchen, and took out his sharpest paring knife. He headed back to the cavern. Chapter 25. Regrets and Acceptance. Martin remembered the trip with Skinner to the cavern perfectly. The trip back was also crystal clear. However, she had no idea about what had happened to Skinner in the cavern, and that churned in her gut until it ached. Her greatest fear was that the cavern had turned Skinner into another Spooky. She dreaded the prospect of receiving a report of a particularly gory crime. She would know who had committed it, know there was nothing she could have done about it, and worse, know that she would do everything in her power to protect the killer, Skinner. She also knew that she would hate herself, but no matter how much she did, she would still protect him. The suspect whom she had written in large letters at the top of her suspect list was about to make life in the department difficult and unpredictable. In the end, amid all the regrets, she would accept it. It was the price of redemption for her mortal sin. While the Teresa Taylor case occupied the bulk of the department's resources, Martin spent the bulk of the next 3 weeks directing the investigation away from Skinner. As investigators searched for physical evidence, Detective Martin warned Skinner so that he could dispose of it. As they developed lines of inquiry, she warned him to come up with plausible answers. When they began to close in, she found a new suspect or a new angle for the task force to pursue. During those 3 weeks, she waited for a report of a new heinous crime, but nothing of significance had been reported. Each day became a trip on an emotional roller coaster. At the beginning of the day, she was filled with anxiety. At the end of the day, she was relieved that nothing had happened. The ride was taking a toll on her. Sleep became a fond wish. Food smelled and tasted repulsive. Each day she rose wanting to regain control of her will. Each day she lost the battle. And each day she was losing the desire to resist. What little remained of her will was succumbing a little more each time she lied or subverted the investigation. Through the cold neglect and confusion that she created, the case was dying. The call came at 3:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Detective Martin drowsily picked up her cell phone. As she listened, her hand began to tremble. She could feel the blood rushing from her head. Her lips started quivering, and she found it hard to respond clearly. After she put the phone down, she sat with her back against the headboard, pulled her legs up, wrapped her arms around them, and sunk into the fetal position. She rocked back and forth as the torture of what she was becoming chipped away at her soul. The bed moaned with every rock. Again, she would become an accessory to a murder, the protector of a man who might just have committed a crime even more hideous than Spooky's. As her mind raced through the possible horrors that she would see, she froze. Then the trembling began. She was not going to be a part of this savage terror a second time. I have to get him. He can't get away with this. The oppressive guilt returned. The hairs on her forearms began to move. She felt that crawling sensation again. She vowed that she wouldn't look. Then the itching started and became stronger and stronger. Frantic, she looked at her forearms. In tiny pinpricks of blood, the words had returned. Ignocerus eum protege. Ipsi voluntas Dei est. The letters vibrated. Against her will, she thought, I must protect him. The itching stopped. The letters disappeared. She now knew that each time she contemplated betrayal, the remorse would return and the tiny biting spiders would scrawl the message over her arms, making it deeper and deeper with each pass until she surrendered. She moved to the edge of the bed, put her head in her hands, and pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes. She was in agony. She felt totally and completely alone. She was lost in a place where no one could find her. She wanted to be rescued, but she also knew she would do anything to avoid it. She stood. She went to her closet. Her clothes were precisely arranged. Without thinking, she pulled a pantsuit from the rack. She bent and picked up her pair of sensible shoes. She went to the dresser, grabbed panties and a bra, and precisely laid out all of her clothes. Then she methodically got dressed. There was no wasted motion. She opened the drawer to the nightstand, pulled out her holstered 9mm Glock, and clipped it to her waistband. She went to the bathroom, brushed her hair in measured strokes, expressionlessly looked at herself, mechanically walked to the door, and opened it. She was on remote control from a source that was not of her own choosing. It was mindless obedience. It was torture. Detective Martin dreaded what she might see when she heard that the site of the murder was the Lambda Zone. She, along with many of the officers, knew about the Lambda Zone. It had been featured, along with its history, a few times in local publications. It is cuddled in a corner of the Old District in Seattle. The nightclub is housed in a turn of the 20th century red brick building with subtle neon lights and the Greek letter lambda displayed prominently in the window. In the 70s, the letter lambda was used by GAA, Gay Activists Alliance. The lambda L stood for liberation. A member who had moved from New York with his lover started the bar. It was a gay bar and popular. The one time that Martin had been called there, she found the patrons to be friendly. On the whole, she sensed that they were good people. They were just different. It was 3:50 a.m., and the flashing lights of patrol cars, ambulances, and paramedics were overpowering Lambda Zone's neon sign. Detective Martin angled up to the curb at the front of the club. With the exception of the one witness, there were only the cops, the paramedics, the ambulance crew, and the forensic team. Martin was led to the parking lot at the east side of the club. 3 feet from the club's wall, someone had placed 2 bodies at a 90-degree angle to the wall. They were a man and a woman, both fully clothed, both with ashen coloring. There was no blood on the clothes. They were placed directly under the spotlight that illuminated the wall and part of the lot. The forensic team was hovering around the bodies. They had cordoned off the parking lot, and everyone had respected the crime scene. "Okay, Melinda, what do we have here?" Martin asked. "I think he's back." "Who's back?" "Spooky. After all this time." "I don't think so," Martin said, trying to sound convincing. "You need to talk to the jogger." Melinda pointed to a man standing about 15 feet away. "I'm about to take the bodies back to the morgue." Standing next to a man in sweatpants and a sweatshirt were Officer Stansfield and his longtime partner, Officer Lendl. "Okay, Stansfield, what do you have for me?" Martin asked. "Well, it was about 3 a.m., and we were doing our usual downtown rounds. We were shining our spotlight in alleys and parking lots when we came upon this jogger who was waving us down. He leads us into the parking lot, and that's where we find these 2 unhappy campers." He pointed to the bodies. Lendl added, "Seems like he was jogging." He snickered and quipped, "The man, not one of the bodies." Martin shot a deadly glare at the humor. Lendl gulped down his smile. "Anyway, he was jogging past Lambda Zone when he sees a guy in a hoodie standing over those 2 bodies. The guy turns to him and yells abomination. And get this, the jogger's description of the guy's scarred face is your old friend Spooky. Then the guy, Spooky, gets into a van and drives away." "Could he give you a license plate and description of the van?" "No. The guy said that he was, and I quote, scared shitless. And I don't blame him. All he knows is that it was a dark-colored van. Why didn't he call the police right away? He doesn't jog with his cell phone. What was he doing jogging at that time of the morning?" "He's a stockbroker, and he says that it's the only time he can jog because the stock market opens early, 'cause it's on the East Coast time." "Okay, thanks. Take his statement and let him go." Melinda stood up, smirked at Martin, and commented, "So, what do you say now? It's spooky, isn't it? Maybe. However, it could be. Can you ever just admit that you're wrong? I mean, can you even say those words?" Here, try it. I was wrong. Melinda paused until she realized that Lindy wasn't up to the task. Jesus, Lindy, nobody's going to hold it against you. Everybody is wrong once in a while. She shook her head at Martin's insistence on infallibility. I'll see you at the lab, princess. Or should I say Pope Perfect the First? Martin tightened her jaw, scowled at Melinda, turned on her sensible shoes, and hurried over to Lendl, who was still taking notes from the witness. With Melinda's comments echoing in her head, Martin grilled the jogger for another 30 minutes. By the time she was done, the man had begun to think he was a suspect. Lendl tried to get her to back off, but Martin was still pissed at Melinda. So the man would need to suffer a little longer. When Martin turned to answer a question from the lone remaining forensic crew member, Lendl jerked his head for the jogger to leave and leave quickly. When Martin turned around, she was livid, but Lendl told her that he thought she was done with him, and besides, the man needed to get to work. Martin gave Lendl her well-honed look of disapproval. However, Lendl had become so accustomed to seeing it that he didn't respond. Lendl parted with, "We'll see you back at the station, Lindy." "That's Detective Martin, Sergeant Lendl." "Oh, so we're back to that again," Stansfield responded sarcastically. "Back to what?" Lindy barked. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." Then he punctuated his displeasure with a snide, "Detective Martin." The partners added a small laugh. Martin heard the laugh and thought she heard the word bitch. The old Martin from 6 years ago would have instinctively turned to confront them. She was not that Martin anymore. However, she could feel her rustling under the surface as she realized what this case might require of her. She had already endured a great deal, and her recent visit to the cavern had unveiled a secret that she was required to keep. Melinda and the other officers were wrong. Spooky was spread eagle on the wall of the cavern with the life drained out of him. However, in a way he had returned. He was just in a different body, Skinner's. That was even worse. The man that she had despised for as long as she had known him was now under her protection. And then it belatedly struck her. The face. That description was of Spooky. Crap, this doesn't fit, she thought. Did Skinner carve up his face like Spooky had done? Could that narcissist actually mutilate himself? No, Skinner could never do that. So, had Spooky been raised from the dead? Was this really the handiwork of this black-winged servant of God? Was this the beginning of another biblical retribution? Was Skinner really the instrument of God's wrath? Hell, she didn't even think that Skinner was religious. He certainly never acted like a Christian, even a bad one. So why was she commanded to take Skinner to the cavern? What part was he going to play in this horrific drama? How could a man like this be an instrument of God's will? If this heavenly vengeance was starting all over again, she was going to be living in the deepest, darkest abyss of despair. She could feel her soul sinking, and she felt powerless to stop it. Suddenly, death appealed to her. Melinda looked down at the now naked body of the woman as she lay on a slab in the morgue. She had been exsanguinated. She had the same 3 cuts as Spooky's victim some 6 years ago, a 15-inch cut near the bottom of the abdomen and 2 cuts on either side that formed a flap, which had been carefully sutured even more skillfully than Spooky's first victim. As she cut the first suture, she felt an odd, inappropriate sensation. She smiled. It was like opening a present on Christmas morning. She hoped for something as spectacular as Spooky's Jane Doe. She wasn't disappointed. When she pulled up the flap after the last suture was cut, she gazed in amazement. Holy crap! She looked at the body of the man who was on the slab next to the woman. So, what little secret are you carrying? She excitedly rushed over to the man, cut the sutures, and pulled the flap. I don't believe it. He did. That lunatic did it. She amusedly chuckled. Why, you perverted little sadist. I have to admit it is clever and quite a statement. But damn, Spooky, you are one sick son of a bitch. She backed away from the tables and stared at the 2 corpses. Melinda spun around when she heard the doorknob on her lab door. For a fleeting moment, she had imagined Spooky sneaking up from behind. It was Martin. "Lindy, you are not going to believe this," she said with an impish smile. "Believe what?" "What our friendly scar-faced surgeon has done." "What?" "Go ahead. Take a look." Lindy stepped between the two tables, gazed into one abdomen and then the other. She stopped, looked again, and then turned to Melinda. "That's right, Detective Martin. He switched the sexual reproductive organs, at least the internal ones. He left the external alone." "What's that smell?" "What smell? It's kind of like rotten eggs." "I don't smell anything. It's really faint." "Never mind. Maybe it's just the morgue, and you're used to it." Martin continued. "Did he leave any note this time? Any cryptic Latin biblical quote?" "I haven't found anything yet." "Well, keep looking." Melinda sarcastically replied. "Keep looking? Brilliant. Damn good recommendation. I'm glad you thought of it. Otherwise, I was going to stop, but now that you've told me, I guess I'll keep doing my job. Thanks, Lindy. You've been a big help." The Martin of 10 years ago would have seen the comment as friendly teasing, just sarcastic banter. The Martin of 6 years ago, when Parker broke her heart, would have found the comment to be an unmitigated insult. Today's Martin didn't even respond to it. The only thing that was on her mind was another horrible murder that she would unwillingly cover up. As hard as the first murders were to deal with, this was even more difficult because it was more grotesquely perverted. "I need to tell someone," Martin whispered to herself as the door closed behind her. Before she had a chance to take another step, the feeling of stinging little pinpricks and the dragging of spider silk swept across her forearms. Again, the command appeared. She twitched several times, jerked, and was slammed rigid against the wall. She forced the notion from her mind. The sensation of crawling spiders disappeared along with the message. Lindy returned to her office, shut and locked the door behind her, sat at her desk, and slipped into a vacant, despondent stare. She tried several times that day to tell Captain Johnson about her involvement with Skinner, but each time the pinpricks, dragging silk, and command would return. She wondered if her life would ever be her own again. For the rest of the day, she steeled herself to what she knew was coming. More than at any time in her life, she was determined to bear the pain and tell someone the truth. She was ready. Her mind was set. She would tell Captain Johnson, and no amount of pain would stop her. As she walked toward Johnson's office, the guilt hit and the crawling started. She gritted her teeth. At the door to the captain's office, the tiny pinpricks began. By the time she was standing in front of him, her arms felt as if they were burning. She tried to talk, but she could say nothing. Her mouth would not even open. She raised her forearms. The letters were on fire. Johnson looked quizzically at her. "Lindy, is there something you want to say?" She looked up at him. "You're not going to cry, are you?" he asked half-jokingly. She looked at her arms. "Is there something wrong with your arms? Are you okay?" She shook away the desire to confess. The fire extinguished. Her voice returned. "Yes, I'm fine. I just forgot what I came in here to talk to you about." "Why were you staring at your arms?" "Oh, I was just trying to remember. Sometimes staring at them helps. I know it sounds silly, but it works." "Well, find another method. That just looks freaky." For a second, I thought the return of Spooky had gotten to you. "Oh no, sir. This time we'll get him. I can feel it." "Well, feel it soon. We don't need him carving his way through Seattle again." "Yes, sir. If I remember what I was going to tell you, I'll come back." "Good." She awkwardly turned and walked to her office. By the time she closed the door to her office behind her, the fear of what had happened to her had her trembling violently. She felt as if she were going to faint. She struggled to her chair and sat hard. She couldn't stop shaking. She felt so very cold. And then she surrendered. The trembling stopped. She was warm again. She would do what she was told. She would never stop hating what she was being forced to do, but she could see that it was in vain, at least for now.